Today on Stronger Than Reason, we finally talk about what might be the most unique band in alternative rock, the one and only Primus. All right, welcome to Stronger Than Reason. Someone told me the theme song is just too loud, so that's my response to that. Well, I've got to be straight up with you all right now. I'm an honest guy, and there's no way I can do this episode without just putting this right out on Front Street. So here it is. I was not always a Primus fan. In fact, I didn't get on board this particular bus until just 5.5 years ago. And I mean really on board. Of course, I've known about Primus for decades and had a passing familiarity with their stuff, going back to seeing the video for Jerry Was a Race Car Driver on MTV 30 plus years ago. I mean, how could you be in Gen X with any interest in music at all and not at least know that there's a really unusual band called Primus? If you were doing the MP3 thing 20 years ago, you probably ran Winamp on a computer, and while tagging your songs, you might have noticed that Primus had their very own genre. So amidst rock pop and heavy metal and gangsta rap, you had just Primus. So you knew, even without listening to them, that they were special, right? I've heard Primus doesn't take drugs. Drugs take Primus. These guys are a cult band in the sense that they have a strong, dedicated following and a relatively high profile, but never really broke through into the mainstream in such a way that, you know, your mom would have any idea who Primus were. They were never really a household name. More importantly, though, they've always been highly respected as musicians because they are players first and foremost. And when you play as tight and as cool as Primus, you can get away with damn near anything, like having a very odd sense of humor and being very eccentric. So my discussion today is going to range around a bit because unlike most of the other stuff I talk about on here, I don't have a very deep knowledge of this band. It's more just a smattering of things, impressions, and different weird stuff that stands out to me. Of course, I've been aware of them since they hit MTV like a bomb in 1991 when they came out with their second studio album, Sailing the Seas of Cheese. You could hardly miss the video for Jerry Was a Race Car Driver because it got a reaction from everyone. Everyone had an opinion about this. The first thing I noticed was just the insane bass line. It was all slapping and popping, but at breakneck speed. I had never heard someone play bass like that before. And if that weren't enough, the bassist was also the singer, and he was singing the most peculiar lyrics. It was just this whacked out storytelling that reminded me of classic Frank Zappa. But most of all, this guy was just plain weird. He was a weirdo. Just his mannerisms, his hairdo, his expressions, the way he sang like a redneck on speed. He was just super strange, but obviously super talented. And I soon learned his name was Les Claypool. And the rest of the band were also obviously talented, though the other two guys, a guitarist and a drummer, kept a lower profile in the video, the guitarist being Larry Lalonde, a.k.a. Lur, and the drummer Tim Alexander, a.k.a. Herb. Most of all, though, my impression was that they had a really unique sound. It was sketchy and noisy, but technically adept. There was just a lot going on musically. Jerry was structured like a pop song, but the emphasis was on the rhythm and texture, and there wasn't much going on in the way of melody. The verse was this sort of hyper-funk, and the chorus veered into heavy mosh pit territory. So even if you didn't become an instant fan, and a lot of my friends didn't, we could all agree that Primus was cool. And I don't think anyone I knew actively disliked them. But while not many people bought their stuff in my crowd, we all held them in high regard. And a friend of mine did buy this, though. This is an EP from 1992 called Miscellaneous Debris. And miscellaneous it was. My pal EF1J gave this to me a bunch of years ago when he was cleaning out his CD collection, something I know nothing about. So it's an artifact of my childhood as well as just a cool CD. It has 5 tracks, all covers. It has songs by Peter Gabriel, Colin Moulding of XTC, The Residents, The Meters, and most importantly to young me, Pink Floyd. See, I didn't much listen to anything here as a kid other than the Floyd song, if I'm being honest, and it was a cover of Have a Cigar, which I'm sure you know hails from their classic 1975 album, Wish You Were Here. And it is a pretty straight cover, I gotta say, though funkified, of course, and with the reference to which one's Pink replaced with which one's Bob Cock. Bob Cock being, of course, a character in the mythology of early Primus, and who was portrayed in videos by their pal Adam Gates. Namely, the video for Jerry Was a Race Car Driver. He's the guy ordering the nachos who later gets sideswiped by a skateboarder who's played by Lur. So I kind of dug the Residents cover too, and of course, that led me down a Residents rabbit hole, which, next to the one that brought Alice to Wonderland, is maybe the strangest rabbit hole you can possibly go down. But from here, I'm sorry to say, Primus largely fell off my radar, and we're talking a span of maybe 25 years, during which they would go through a lot of stuff. A lot of albums, a lot of band member changes. Tim would come and go, and at times they would backfill him with their original drummer, Jay Lane, who also played in bands like Bob Weir's Rat Dog, and at times with Brian Brain Mantia, who I knew from his involvement in Praxis with Bill Laswell and his collaborations with Buckethead, and also his stint in Guns N' Roses in those odd years leading up to Axl releasing Chinese Democracy. Now, I should point out I haven't listened to Chinese Democracy, but I suspect if I did, it might be my favorite GNR album ever, judging from what I've heard about it. I probably learned about Brain's involvement from breathless articles in Rolling Stone, which Mrs. Stronger Than Reason used to subscribe to way back in ye olden times. My point, though, is that Primus has had entire careers during these intervening decades since I first found out about them, and I missed out on a lot of it. I was busy doing other stuff, and I didn't really think about them again until November 2019. So what happened then? What brought Primus back into my life? It was actually the Slayer Farewell Tour, which featured Primus, Ministry, and Phil Anselmo as opening acts. Now, going into this, my sights were set on seeing Ministry live. As you know, I'm a huge fan of their early work up until about, 1994 or so. And while I'd seen a version of Revco live, minus Al, I had never seen Ministry in any form. So that was what I was looking forward to most. Primus, fine. I still had a lot of regard for them, but wasn't a fan per se. Slayer, sure, why not? Phil Anselmo, well, I knew who he was, and I knew Pantera, of course, which, by the way, gets auto-corrected to Panera on all of my devices, like the crappy restaurant. But I'm not really a Pantera fan, or a Panera fan for that matter. And didn't Phil do something unsavory that threw him into a lot of hot water? Like, didn't he say a bunch of crazy racist stuff? I think he might have tried to recant and apologize, but the guy has continued to just say and do these terrible things. So, I don't know. Screw Phil Anselmo. I wasn't interested in him. I think I used his set to catch up on my email. Now, Primus opened the show that night, and I was immediately sucked in by their 2 openers, those damn blue collar tweakers and Too Many Puppies, both of which are these badass jams and are now among my favorite Primus songs. They just take me right back to that show. The surprise and delight of just getting bashed over the head with them for really the first time. It was just amazing. And, those songs were quite old. And they did play a few songs that I did recognize, like Jerry, of course, and Tommy the Cat, and Mr. Crinkle. And if that weren't enough, they covered Rush's Cygnus X1 damn near perfectly. And I caught myself wondering in the midst of that, where have these guys been my whole life? Why am I not their biggest fan? Everything they're doing here is right up my alley. The kick-ass music, the offbeat humor, the storytelling, covering Rush. I mean, wow. It was just a real eye-opener. And keep in mind, too, that this was just a month or so past experiencing Ghost for the first time, in a live show, no less, and having much the same reaction. So it was a good time for me in live music, I guess, two transformative experiences in a row. And I realized I needed to learn me some Primus. So the first thing I did when I came home was pick up their comp called They Can't All Be Zingers, which the band describes as classic Primus songs repackaged for your listening convenience and our financial benefit. So, fair enough. And I re-familiarized myself with their music. Now, do I have a comprehensive understanding of their full history and discography? I do not. As I said at the top, there is just way, way more for me to explore, and I do intend to continue doing that at my own merry pace for a long time to come. I have, however, watched a ton of their live shows online. They are a fantastic and entertaining live act, no matter who's behind the drum kit, which leads me to another timely and salient matter that we'll dig into here in a bit. Maybe you know that to which I refer. But first, I can hear some of you there in the back hollering and wanting to know how Ministry stacked up at that show. After all, I was really there to see them, not Primus or Slayer or whatever. And it pains me to say that Ministry were not great. Part of it was the fact that I was just way up in the back of the place, pretty much as far from the stage as it was possible to be. And for sure, part of it was that they played under house lights for some reason. I mean, what the hell? That just makes no sense. They had bright lights on in the entire place through the whole set. And I did dig the music. It was very heavily biased toward their 80s and 90s stuff. The music sounded okay. They just didn't have much in the way of a performance, at least not that projected up to where I was. They didn't have any videos. They just had house lights and, a big lit up cross on Al's mic stand. And they just didn't reach me way up there in the back. Now, I had similarly crappy seats for Nine Inch Nails in 2013, and that was one of the best shows I've ever seen. Maybe the best. It just blew me away, so I knew it wasn't just the seats. I gotta admit I was a little disappointed with Ministry there, but at least now I can say I finally saw Al. The next step in my Primus fandom was going back through all their videos and experiencing 30 years of complete nuttiness. As I did that, I realized that their live show included a lot of bits from the videos, so that kind of explained what it was I was seeing at the show. The video for Jerry Was a Race Car Driver is a pretty standard video that intercut a live performance with shots of cars on a speedway. But my favorite quickly became Winona's Big Brown Beaver, a song from 1995's Tales from the Punch Bowl. It's now one of their signature tunes, and it would get a Grammy nomination for Best Hard Rock Performance. Anyway, this video is just legendary. If you haven't seen it, for God's sake, shut me off and go out and watch it right now. Easily one of the top 5 videos ever, because it's a perfect blend of outrageous, hilarious, and downright creepy. The band appears as 3 big plastic cowboys. They're actually wearing latex suits, and the creepy thing is that the faces are somewhat realistic. And by that I mean the faces just exaggerate each member's real features, and their mouths and eyes are their real mouths and eyes. So the whole combination just lands them squarely in the uncanny valley, and it's just super unsettling and bizarre. The other weird thing is that they were filmed at like half speed, so the video shows them playing their instruments and walking around in this like herky-jerky kind of way that's funny, but it's also kind of terrifying. And there's this one scene where the 3 of them are just marching across a grassy field, and judging from the discussions and comments online, that scene was potent nightmare fuel for thousands of fans. Really though, honestly, the video is funny and clever and great, and really made me realize how far Primus was willing to go for the bit. And it really wasn't just about the music for them. It was the whole thing. And I should also point out that like most of their songs, this one does have clever lyrics, which it presents in a kind of follow the bouncing ball style. However, this one takes it a step further with plenty of double entendres, which you might have gathered from the song's title. Overall, just an amazing song and video, very popular live. I understand that the cowboy costumes are now hanging in a House of Blues somewhere, of course. Another popular video was the one they did for the song My Name is Mud, which is from 1993's Pork Soda. And it depicts Les as a psycho killer, and not in the quirky David Byrne kind of way. The song is essentially about what happens next after one guy kills another, which wasn't evident to me on the first listen, because I was just flummoxed, I say, by this song's bass line. It didn't sound like a bass line. It sounded like a machine gun blast of 30-second notes. And I've watched Les play this live a bunch of times, and I still have no idea how he does it. He's just absolutely unique as a bassist. I don't even know if any other band could adequately cover this song. I think very few would have the chops to pull it off, but, maybe I'm wrong. By the way, if you like the vibe of this song, My Name is Mud, and you like Les's kind of dark storytelling in general, you might want to check out the novel he wrote. Yes, the novel. I picked it up as soon as I realized he had written a book, the very moment. I mean, how could I not? I was positive that whatever was in that book, it would be funny, clever, and weird, and I wasn't disappointed. The title is South of the Pump House, and it came out in 2006. So as usual, I was late to the party. I think I got it just a couple years ago. And I recently reread it since I've been kind of going down the Primus rabbit hole lately. And I read it, when I got it a few years ago, and I sort of remembered it as a quirky tale about a fishing trip gone wrong. But wow, reading it again, I had forgotten how dark it really is. It's a good story if you can get past the one character, this guy who really makes a point to be as offensive as possible in every way. But the story also has a good bit of gore, especially toward the end. And I don't want to spoil anything here, but it has a crazy O. Henry twist ending that really ties it all together, to paraphrase the dude. So overall, I did enjoy it. It reads more or less like a very long Primus song. So if you like Les's lyrics, I'm sure you'll like the book. It's very attuned to My Name is Mud, I think. In particular, I can see one character in the book as this singer in that song, because he winds up in the same situation. By the way, I watched Primus's performance at Woodstock 94, which famously occurred in a very muddy field. You can go back and listen to episode 61 for a story of how that affected Nine Inch Nails that day. But when Primus started to play My Name is Mud at Woodstock 94, some ding-dongs in the audience thought it would be a good cue to start pelting the band with mud. Les immediately shut down the song and read them the riot act. No mud, or the band wouldn't play. Amazingly, that solved the problem, and they were able to play the song and continue the set. And I think that says more than anything how much people respect this band, that a wild crowd of that size would rein it in just because Les said so. Just very cool. But I quickly found out that Primus had other songs with even crazier lyrics. As I was trolling YouTube for their videos, I came across another of their signature tunes, Tommy the Cat, which is also on Sailing the Seas of Cheese. I don't know how this tune came about, but it's as if Les decided to marry up an unplayable bass line with an unsingable lyric. The bass is even faster and more complex than usual, and it just seems wholly unconnected with the lyrics, which he delivers like an auctioneer on a dozen Red Bulls. The video has these old-timey animations that portray the scene, a bunch of tomcats hanging around O'Malley's alley when a sexy she-cat comes by looking for some action. And the whole second half of the song is just Tommy the Cat making his introduction in the only way he knows how. It's just silly and great. This one is a live staple, one that drives the mosh pit wild, with the crowd singing the "Say Babies" at the end. And there's also an amazing clip online of them playing this tune on The Dennis Miller Show. Remember that one? Whew, really dating myself here. But you got to check it out. That must have been in 92 or so. When was Dennis Miller on? It had to have been around that time in 92. Anyway, they launch into Rush's YYZ with Les just standing completely still like a statue. And when they get to the first break, he comes to life and launches into Tommy the Cat. And it's just a perfect performance. The bass, the vocals, the drums, the guitar. Some lunatic from the audience even manages to get on stage and rock out with the band before getting dragged off. And right at the end, while the credits are rolling, they suddenly launch into Tippy Toes by the Meters, which is on this record, just in time for the announcer to come in and do the outro like they used to do in old talk shows. Guests of the Dennis Miller Show stay at his mom's house, or whatever the guy says. So that transition was just perfectly timed. But wow, it was just a jaw-dropping, intense performance. And I like to watch it again every few months just to get me into my happy place. Another song of theirs that I learned to love was, I think, the first one they played at the show. It had such a fantastic groove, great vocal hooks, and the video screens behind the band had some crazy cartoon that I wasn't familiar with at the time. But I later learned it was an animated feature called Salad Fingers, of course. So the band hadn't made a video for this song per se, but for whatever reason, they decided to show bits of this cartoon instead. The song, of course, was Those Damn Blue-Collar Tweakers, which I was happy to find out was another live staple and frequent show opener, maybe because it has such a distinctive intro. And you know, a distinctive intro is a great thing. All the best songs have them because the band can really tease it, draw it out, build that anticipation. But you as the fan know from the first note or beat or whatever exactly what is coming. And that's what happens here with Lur just playing this one chord over and over and using a pedal to pitch shift it. And then the bass and drums come in and just pin you to the floor. And lyric-wise, Les says he was inspired by his stint as a contractor back in the old days. He would see these middle-aged guys taking amphetamines and crank or whatever to keep up with the younger workers, you know, to get through the workday, hanging drywall or whatever. So this song is about them. And in a way, Les is a lot like Frank Zappa, because Frank took a lot of crap for his sillier lyrics, but he argued that most of his songs were about real life, and that even his more outrageous characters were people that really existed, unlike the topics of other artists' songs, like flying unicorns or whatever. Frank would sometimes run into these real-life characters, and he'd be inspired to honor them with their own song, and that's pretty much what Les did here for Those Damn Blue-Collar Tweakers. After all, they're the backbone of this town, or so I've read. Anyhow, it's just a fantastic tune, and I remember every moment of hearing it for the first time live at that show, so I'm glad they played it. Likewise with the next number at the show, which was Too Many Puppies, and this was off their first album, Frizzle Fry. It too had a very unusual but heavy groove, and I was just mesmerized by it. That show really started with this just amazing 1-2 punch. I especially like how the title of this song gives the complete wrong idea about its meaning, because Too Many Puppies is an anti-war song, and the puppies in question are soldiers. I don't think there's a video for it, but at the show they projected these images of marching soldiers and these red LED-like lights, and at first it just looked like patterns of lines moving across the stage, but then you realized what it was, and the words just took on an entirely new meaning, so it's just a really cool tune. And of course, they also played everyone's favorite, Mr. Crinkle, which is also on Pork Soda. This video is just something else. I think it's common for people to say, you know, the first time I watched it, I had no idea what I was seeing or hearing. And it makes you wonder what drugs they were taking, frankly, but this one has Les dressed up like a weird pig wearing a blue suit playing an upright bass with a bow. And he appears to be in a warehouse, and as the song progresses, this army of strange characters just passes in front of the camera. And I can't even describe it. The whole thing is just completely nuts, like a fever dream. All sorts of circus freaks and performers and weirdos. It's just very hard to describe. And the song itself and the lyrics are creepy. The really cool thing, though, is that they filmed the whole thing in one take. I mean, there was no way back then to composite multiple takes of just so many subjects moving around in the camera. So they just had to wing it. And this was a good 10 years before OK Go would make viral sensations out of crazy, impossible to shoot videos. Unfortunately for Primus, Mr. Crinkle, the video, didn't go viral. MTV hardly touched it, but the official video on YouTube has about 15 million views, roughly 1 million views for every year it's been up, so safe to say it's got a cult following. As one of the strangest videos ever made, it's definitely more strange than Winona's Big Brown Beaver, which at least has some kind of humor about it. Mr. Crinkle skips the humor and goes straight for Hieronymus Bosch. So let's see. Other videos. Oh yeah, how could I forget? This one, I'm sad to say, I didn't ever watch until a couple weeks ago. And man, honestly, that's really embarrassing. I mean, this song's been out, almost 30 years, and I'm just discovering it now, and it's amazing. So if you are thinking that I'm in any way cool, think again, because I think this whole podcast is just an excuse to teach myself humility. Anyway, this song is just nuts, like most Primus songs, and it's been my earworm since I heard it. The video maybe caused that because the video's funny and I keep watching it. The song is Shake Hands with Beef, which was from the Brown album, which came out in 1997. This was the first album without Tim Alexander on drums, so they had brought in Brain. Now, I love Tim's playing, but I love Brain too, and somehow it's absolutely the same band with both of these guys. And normally that wouldn't be the case when you switch drummers, but they're both just so amazingly good. And Shake Hands with Beef is an extremely technical song. It's all rhythm. It doesn't vary much. It is just a steamy prog funk rock jam from one end to the other. And the video is sort of this hillbilly barbecue thing with the band playing the song as little insect guys on the top of a trash can lid. And my favorite part of it is this bendy leg dance that Les does in the one scene. It's maybe the best thing I've seen all year so far. Anyway, the lyrics make very little sense, but Les said the title came from a friend of his who normally didn't eat meat, but every now and then would have a burger or something, and he explained it as shaking hands with beef, and Les took that as a metaphor for, occasionally getting out of your comfort zone. And lo, another song was born. There's a couple great concerts on YouTube featuring Brain, like Rock Plas 97, for instance, where they play this tune. What an amazing show. And it's a credit to Brain that he can just come out and play all of these old songs as well as Herb, but kind of with his own spin on it. And that's a compliment to both of these guys, actually. They're both just in this whole other league. Now, I don't know if it counts as a video, but I know that Primus also wrote and performed the theme to South Park. And that's more or less an animated Les that sings the song in the intro. And that fact surprised my kids, and I think it really kind of impressed them too, because I know they're far more into South Park than Primus, after all. Anyway, that's a pretty good sampling of their songs and videos, but there are a ton more, and I didn't even mention Lee Van Cleef. That's another good one. Although I do have a copy of The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly here, coincidentally. What is clear, though, is that Primus is such a creative force that the music, as impressive as it is only part of their act. So much of it is bound up in the visual presentation, the videos, the shows. Primus is truly a multimedia experience. Listening to them is okay, but listening and watching is the best, in my opinion. So I got into two great bands in 2019, Ghost and Primus, and I went to both shows with no expectations, but was blown away and won over in both cases. I became a fan, and for me, it was a great year for live music, but further events have gotten me back into Primus again and again since that time. So in 2021, they embarked on a new tour called A Tribute to Kings, in which they devoted a set to covering Rush's 1977 album, A Farewell to Kings, and a second set to Primus songs. Now, this blew my mind in several ways. First, very few bands have the chops to cover Rush, and no one covers an entire Rush album. That's simply not reasonable or sane. Second of all, A Farewell to Kings is kind of a deep cut. That's a sleeper among Rush's albums. I mean, it does have a few classics on it. All of them do. Xanadu, of course, and Closer to the Heart, which is maybe the only radio-friendly tune on it. And then the fan favorite Cygnus X1, which Primus covered on the Slayer tour. I guess maybe learning that song gave them a leg up. I don't know. But it also has some less well-known tunes like Cinderella Man and Madrigal. And those are deep cuts. And I know that even saying this, I'm baiting all the hardcore Rush fans out there. How can you say Cinderella Man is a deep cut? What kind of fan are you? And to them I say, easy, easy. I'm one of you. I guess my point is just that I would expect a band to cover a more popular album, like, say, Moving Pictures, rather than A Farewell to Kings. So the fact that they did that, I was just so impressed by it, because it means Primus's love of Rush comes from a place of real deep fandom. If A Farewell to Kings is your go-to Rush album, you're pretty damn committed, and as a Rush fan, I respect that. I did know that there was a connection between these bands. I know Geddy interviewed Les in his big book of bass, and I did learn that Primus had actually opened for Rush back in the 90s. Here is a great picture of them from that time. I think this was from the Roll the Bones tour, if I'm not mistaken. I just love this shot. I didn't make it to one of these shows they did where they covered A Farewell to Kings, but I did watch a few of them online, and I enjoyed them immensely. Lur and Les were rocking these big double neck guitars, just like Geddy and Alex, and Les had a dual keyboard rig on his side of the stage. He was just living the dream, and Herb even had Primus written on his kick drum in A Farewell to Kings' font. So the whole thing just made me super happy. All they needed were the kimonos. That this great band would do this as a tribute to Rush out of their love for the band and their music. Especially so soon after Neil Peart passed away, R.I.P. Even now, I do get a little emotional thinking about how cool it was that they did this. It's so awesome. My son has a friend who went to see this show with his dad, and if I had any sense, I would have done that too, for me and for my kid. I hope that kid enjoyed it and maybe thought to get into Rush himself. I am sure doing this, Primus has inspired a whole new generation of Rush fans. So that was really rad. But naturally, Primus came up in my radar again in recent months. And you may know that Herb suffered some health issues in the last year and that he left the band once again, for reals this time. I mean, you can't fault the guy. He's the drummer that got Primus on the map. He's the man. He's the one that dressed up in latex and sat in with Buck Naked and the Bare Bottom Boys. Countless tours, countless shows. So if he wants to spend more time with his family, so be it. He's a legend. He's more than earned it. But it did leave the band somewhat in a lurch since they had a commitment to play a show at the Fox Theater in Oakland. Fortunately, they were able to call in some favors with their affiliates. See, Les has any number of side bands going on at any given time, like Sausage, Holy Mackerel, the Frog Brigade, Les Claypool's Fancy Band, the Claypool-Lennon Delirium, and my favorite, Colonel Claypool's Bucket of Bernie Brains, the latter being a truly amazing supergroup consisting of Les, Brains, Buckethead, and Bernie Worrell. So if you want to see some top players really stretching, check them out. It's all improv, baby. Nothing premeditated. Just top players playing at the top of their game and some really goofy costumes. Then you're off and running. So they called in some members of the Frog Brigade to supplement the show. They even brought Brain back as well. One-time gig, the first time he's played with Primus in 24 years. And what can I say? You know, they killed it. The whole show is online naturally. It sounds great, looks great. Watch it. You be the judge. You tell me. Now, despite Brain's triumphant return, it was, alas, only temporary because Primus launched Auditions looking for a permanent replacement. I just thought this was fascinating that anyone could upload an audition video to YouTube, tag it with Primus drum auditions, and conceivably get a look. So thousands of drummers put together videos, and I had a really good time checking them out. It really underscored how many freaking talented drummers are out there. Even some of the drummers that I follow normally got in on the act, and for a hot minute, I considered doing one myself. I mean, it would just be a piss take, of course. I can't play anything like Herb. Pretty much a beginner, but even better, I thought of just programming my old Boss Doctor rhythm with a really simple beat and just showing myself trying to play it over a Primus song and having trouble keeping it in sync, you know, something just totally stupid. But unfortunately, or maybe fortunately, I was too lazy to bother with that. And in the end, they selected John Hoffman of Shreveport, Louisiana. His audition video is still up. I recommend you check it out. He is, of course, shit hot behind the kit with style to spare. He'll get a baptism by fire when Primus tours with Pussifer and A Perfect Circle this spring. And less has indicated he does plan to record new music with John too. And you know, if you think about it, it's kind of funny that they went fishing for a drummer and found John, if you know what I mean. Too appropriate. So one last thing about the drum auditions, Primus evidently invited some of the finalists to LA to jam with them as the last phase of the selection, and now they've begun posting videos of how that went, branding it as the Interstellar Drum Derby. The first video featured Rory Dolan, who killed it. So that gives you an idea of the caliber of these finalists. And I think it's great that even though he didn't get the gig, Primus is promoting him in such a high-profile way. They present the video from Rory's perspective, you know, being invited into the audition studio with its crazy rugs and lights, just an immaculate, amazing drum set waiting for him, getting oriented, only for Les and Lur to amble in, and it's just a wee bit of small talk before they're off, jamming out for a while, and then finally dipping into some Primus songs. And it's hard to imagine what one would be feeling in that situation. You know, the pressure, the thrill, and after all that, there's some candid shots of Les and Lur complimenting his playing and saying really nice things. So it's all very tastefully done. It's all very cool of them to do. I'm looking forward to future episodes. And also, the Fred Armisen cameo was interesting. You know, a stranger once told me I looked like Fred Armisen, and I had no idea who he was talking about because I don't watch TV at all. So I Googled Fred and thought, maybe? I don't know. And the fun fact is, Fred Armisen was a drummer before he became an actor. He played the drums for Trenchmouth in the 90s, so it was kind of cool that he was involved in this too. So why do I love Primus? Well, you gotta hand it to them for being true originals. Like I said at the top, no one else is quite like them. I think they've influenced others far more than they've been influenced. There was a time around the millennium when they may have blended somewhat with the nu metal genre that was popular around then. Believe it or not, Fred Durst of Limp Bizkit co-produced Primus's Anti-Pop album, but that album was definitely not the band's favorite album to make. Other bands of the time were getting into, you know, that rap funk metal territory, and I was never into a lot of these, but, you know, I was sort of aware of them because some of them had opened up for KMFDM around that time, like Korn and Dink, for instance. But they could never touch Primus, and for the most part, Primus has outlasted them all. I think a lot of Primus's appeal comes from their eccentricities, the way they don't fit easily into rock star stereotypes, and especially their sense of humor, because humor is a great social bridge, folks, and that's something that's good to remember in these uncertain times. Even when people can't agree on much, they can usually appreciate it when something is funny. And Primus is funny. And they're also friggin' awesome. And that's how it is. Come for the laughs, stay for the chops. At least that's how it was for me. And I'm really, really glad I finally dug into this band after so many years. It would have been a shame to have completely missed out on so much amazing stuff. Albums, live shows, videos, even books. These guys are the whole package, and that's why I love them. So there you have it, folks. A new old band that took me 30 years to really appreciate, Primus. And really, I barely scratched the surface here today with this discussion. But wow, I love these guys, and I look forward to the new lineup, the next chapter, as it were. Much like KMFDM, I can say with a full heart that Primus sucks, and mean that in a loving way. You're listening to Stronger Than Reason either on YouTube or on the podcast platform of your choice. The show that finally saw a robin in the yard. Spring can't be far away, folks. Unless you're in the southern hemisphere, in which case I'm afraid spring is far away indeed. But hey, I guess things won't be so hot and muggy for you now, right? I suppose? Damn you, tilt of the earth! Hang in there, folks, wherever you are. And as always, I thank you for listening. And until next time, stay strong.